at 9:15 a.m. On Monday, September 15, in Kampong Senderakasi, Kalambong, Inanam, a hillside above Kota Kinabalu has just collapsed after rainfall that has nearly matched an entire monthly record in only 17 days, burying a home in one of Sabah's deadliest September disasters in years. By the end of that week, the death toll has reached 14 and the number of displaced residents has climbed to 3,134. According to MetMalaysia's Sabah Weather and Geophysics Operations Center, Kota Kinabalu recorded 177.4 millimeters on September 13, part of a 650.2 millimeter total by September 17, almost equal to the city's highest monthly total of 658.6 millimeters recorded in June 2006. If you are new here, this channel covers the disasters the world is not paying enough attention to. Stay with me. This disaster did not stay in one valley or one road. It moved across Sabah's west coast corridor from Kota Kinabalu into Penampang about 12 kilometers away, then farther south to Papar and onward toward Beaufort, while other districts including Putatan, Membakut, and Tawau also reported serious impact. According to Bernama, by the evening of September 15, victims from 46 villages were already inside evacuation centers. Then, the wider regional picture grew darker. ReliefWeb, citing IFRC and the Asian Disaster Information Network, later reported 3,134 displaced people across at least 24 evacuation centers and more than 127 affected villages in Sabah. That scale matters because the map of this disaster is also a map of daily life. These are school routes, market roads, power lines, village access roads, hillside homes, and flood-prone lowlands packed into the same emergency. Brown water filled roads that only days earlier carried motorcycles and school vans. Slopes that looked stable in daylight broke loose after days of rain. In some communities, access disappeared first, then fear arrived second, because once the road is gone, everything after that slows down. According to Bernama, the federal response moved quickly. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim approved an immediate RM10 million through the National Disaster Management Agency, on top of RM11 million already channeled through the state government for urgent repairs to basic facilities. The Sabah government canceled its state-level Malaysia Day celebration and redirected attention to relief and rescue. Temporary evacuation centers opened in Penampang, Membakut, Papar, Putatan, and Beaufort. Cash aid was prepared for evacuees, while the next of kin of those killed were also promised assistance. That is the official response at speed. But speed in government announcements does not erase the speed of a hill collapsing into a house. Then there is the damage that keeps spreading after the cameras move on. According to Daily Express, 78 educational institutions in Sabah were damaged by the floods and landslides, including 68 primary schools and 10 secondary schools. Beaufort alone accounted for 35 affected schools, followed by Papar with 20 and Penampang with 6. At the Gaya Teacher Education Institute campus, landslides damaged the water pump house and access roads to academic blocks. Some buildings were no longer used. Students shifted online. Counselors were deployed because the damage was not only physical. Children had lost classrooms, routines, and in some cases family members as well. The numbers tell you how wide the disaster became. The smaller details tell you how it felt. A village road blocked for up to 3 kilometers. Relief centers filling with families who had left in a rush. Wet clothes draped over chairs. School books stacked beside blankets. Plastic bags carrying the few things people could take before the water rose or the slope gave way. The statistics are measured in thousands. The memory is measured in objects. At 9:15 a.m. in Inanam, Akp Kasim Muda, the Kota Kinabalu district police chief, confirmed that 7 victims were found dead after being buried in the landslide at Kampong Senderakasi. 4 of them were children between the ages of 2 and 9. The other victims were adults aged 25 to 50. According to Bernama, this was one of the deadliest single-slope failures in the disaster. The timing matters, because 9:15 in the morning is not the middle of the night. It is the hour when families are supposed to be moving into a normal day. In Papar, that same morning, Sabah Fire and Rescue Department Director Mohd Pasar Aziz confirmed that rescuers found a 38-year-old woman and an 11-year-old boy dead after another landslide struck a house in Kampung Muk. He also said 2 more victims were found after a separate landslide in Kampung Marahang Tuntul, while search and rescue teams continued looking for another person believed trapped. Days earlier, on September 12th, a 97-year-old man had already been killed in a landslide in Kampung Serapong, Penampang. Each location adds another piece to the same pattern. Rain saturated the slopes. Slopes failed above homes. Rescue teams moved from one collapse to the next. And then came the visits that changed the tone of the story from abstract to personal. On September 19 at 2:55 p.m., Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim arrived at Country Heights in Penampang and spent about 30 minutes surveying the landslide site with Sabah Chief Minister Datuk Seri Hajiji Noor. At 3:25 p.m., he went to the temporary relief center at SMK St. Paul Kalopis. Later, he traveled to Kampung Sarapung, then to the Gaya Teacher Education Institute in Kota Kinabalu at 4:30 p.m. The route itself tells the story. This was not one isolated disaster zone. It was a chain of damaged places tied together by rain, slope failure, and floodwater. Inside those relief centers were people whose names should not disappear behind the totals. Frankie Dahing, 60, from Kampung Kalopis, told Bernama he was touched by the Prime Minister's presence and said the visit and aid had eased the burden on displaced families. Lorena Jalidi, 32, from Kampung Kambazan, said meeting the Prime Minister after days of fear was a moving experience. Amber Isaac, 25, from Kampung Sarapong, said her village was among the worst hit and that the main road had been blocked by landslides for up to 3 kilometers. Those are not dramatic words. They are precise words, and precision is what makes them heavy. There is a strange distortion that disasters create. A road disappears in minutes, but the wait for help feels endless. A hillside breaks in seconds, but the memory stretches for days. Time stops behaving normally. That is why the hours in this story matter so much. September 12, September 13, September 15 at 9:15 a.m., September 19 at 2:55 p.m., and 3:25 p.m., and 4:30 p.m. When you line up the times, the disaster stops looking like one tragic headline and starts looking like a rolling crisis moving district by district. Officials also tried to reassure people while the ground was still unstable. Bernama reported that Anwar told victims, "Don't worry, we're doing everything we can to help all of you." Chief Minister Hajiji Noor said the state government's immediate priority was to manage the crisis, coordinate recovery, and ensure rescue operations moved quickly for affected communities. Those statements matter, and they should be included fairly. The government did mobilize funds, cancel public celebrations, and send senior leaders to the ground. But residents had already seen something else with their own eyes. Hillsides had broken apart above houses, floodwater had entered villages, schools had closed, and families had entered shelters carrying shock that no official statement can quickly remove. But here is the detail that tells the real story. A hill should not move like water, but in Sabah this month, it almost has. According to MetMalaysia's Sabah Weather and Geophysics Operations Center, Kota Kinabalu recorded 177.4 millimeters of rain on September 13, followed by 93.2 millimeters on September 14 and 122.8 millimeters on September 15. By September 17, rainfall for the month had reached 650.2 millimeters, nearly matching the city's highest monthly total of 658.6 millimeters recorded in June 2006. That means one part of the state was dealing not with routine monsoon rain, but with a concentrated burst close to a record monthly load compressed into just over 2 weeks. According to MetMalaysia, the wet spell was linked to wind convergence and a low-pressure system over the South China Sea, with more heavy rain expected in eastern Sabah even after the deadliest days. That is why this did not behave like a single storm that arrives, hits, and leaves. The atmosphere kept feeding moisture into already saturated ground. In simple terms, the hills did not get time to drain, reset, or recover. They stayed loaded. Prof. Ear. Dr. Chan Chi-Ming of the Research Center for Soft Soils at University Tun Hussein on Malaysia explained the mechanism clearly. Prolonged, intense rainfall builds up poor water pressure inside the soil. That pressure reduces the force holding soil particles together and weakens the slope's strength. In plain English, the hill loses its grip on itself. A simple analogy works here. Stack dry towels on a shelf and they stay in place. Soak them through and the whole stack begins sliding under its own weight. That is close to what happened beneath homes, roads, and foundations in parts of Sabah. His analysis also points to one of the clearest warning signs of systemic vulnerability. A landslide in Penampang brought down Tower 5 on the Kalopis-Segaliud transmission line, causing power disruption to nearly 230,000 consumers. That is not only a weather story, it is an infrastructure story. When runoff exceeds drainage capacity, water starts collecting where it should not. The slope becomes saturated from within. Ground that looks solid on the surface may already be moving below. That process can trigger what engineers call a rotational landslide, where earth breaks and slips along a curved surface underground. Most people will never see that happening in real time. They only see the moment when the foundation gives way. And this is where the science becomes a warning. Sabah was not only hit by rain, it was hit by rain falling on slopes, drains, roads, homes, and utility lines that had limits. Once those limits were crossed, the disaster spread from soil into infrastructure, from infrastructure into communities, and from communities into schools and relief centers. The weather started the crisis. Saturated ground multiplied it. Weak points exposed it. That is the short version. The longer version is still unfolding. The hidden danger, then, is not only the storm cloud overhead. It is the gap between what Sabah now experiences and what parts of its built environment were prepared to handle. Prof. Chan's analysis says the disaster exposed unstable slopes, inadequate drainage, and development in geohazard-prone terrain. He argues for stronger geotechnical investigation, slope stabilization, subsurface drainage, and real-time monitoring systems that can detect movement before collapse. This is not about blaming one person. It is about asking whether the system has kept pace with the risk. Every blocked road delays rescue. Every flooded school interrupts a child's routine. Every damaged slope threatens the road below it. Every village cut off from access loses time when time matters most. Daily Express reported that education authorities are now discussing slope protection works and new infrastructure proposals after the disaster damaged 78 educational institutions. That tells you where the real pressure is. The impact is not sitting at the edge of public life. It is running through the middle of it. There is also a technical contrast that should make people uncomfortable. Drainage and slope protection designed for standard monsoon cycles are not the same as systems facing 177.4 millimeters in one day and 650.2 millimeters in 17 days. A slope with no continuous monitoring is not the same as a slope equipped with instruments that can detect movement before people are trapped beneath it. A relief center is necessary and important, but it is also evidence that prevention failed somewhere earlier in the chain. To be fair, the authorities did not stand still. Federal money was released, state celebrations were canceled, relief centers were opened, senior leaders visited damaged areas, counselors were sent to affected schools and shelters. These are real actions, and they deserve recognition. But both things can be true at once. The response can be serious, and the protection before the disaster can still be insufficient. That is why the accountability question remains open. There is one more reason this story matters beyond 1 week in September. The UTHM analysis cites a 2024 Malaysian Meteorological Department report saying East Malaysia has seen a 20 to 30% rise in average annual rainfall over the past 2 decades. If that trend continues, then the idea of a normal season becomes less useful. Infrastructure planned for yesterday's pattern begins failing inside tomorrow's climate. What once looked exceptional starts happening often enough to become a warning system in itself. So Sabah is now left with 3 unanswered questions. After the aid, the inspections, and the emergency allocations, which flood and slope protection failures will be publicly identified, and what exactly will be fixed before the next major rain event? How many families are still living below unstable ground or beside flood-prone channels tonight? And how quickly can warnings, evacuations, and road access work if another hillside starts to move? And if rainfall patterns in East Malaysia are intensifying, what is the new threshold where Sabah's slopes stop holding? And has that line already shifted beyond what current infrastructure expects? The rain is still in the forecast. The slopes are still listening. And in Sabah tonight, the mountains are still moving in the dark.